Hello everyone. Welcome to a brief discussion of Leibniz's Theodicy. Leibniz is easily one of the greatest geniuses of the Western world. He was accomplished in philosophy, mathematics, engineering, law, and theology. Today, however, we are going to discuss his response to the problem of evil. We will begin by discussing the rhetorical style of the passage that we are reading. There are three key elements: objections, answers, and prosyllogisms. And it is important that we understand what each of these does. Objections present an idea which is meant to show that belief in the Christian God, which is all-powerful, all-knowing, and loves everyone, is not possible. The material labeled answers is Leibniz's response to the challenges presented by each individual objection. Prosyllogisms can be a bit tricky, but they are basically just arguments that support the claims made in an objection. So if an objection has a controversial claim, you will often see the argument for that claim in a prosyllogism. In brief, objections, sometimes with the support of one or more prosyllogisms, challenge the Christian notion of God, and Leibniz responds to these challenges with his answers. Let's take a look at the objections a little bit more closely. Objections contain three elements: a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. This is called a syllogism. The idea behind a syllogism is that you can infer the conclusion from a combination of the major and minor premises. The major premise provides the predicate of the conclusion, the minor premise provides the subject. It sometimes helps to think of them as being about conceptual truths in the case of the major premise, and true statements about the world in the case of the minor premise. Here is an example. You can see that a syllogism is really just a simple logical argument. Okay, let's look at three of the more interesting points made in the reading. However, I remind you that all of the material is important and that you should read all of it carefully. Let's look at objection 1. Objection 1 concludes that God should be blamed for creating our world, which has evil in it, because he could have created a better world, one that has no evil in it. Leibniz responds that creating a world with evil is not necessarily bad, because that evil might be a means to some greater good. So really, the evil in the world is part of God's plan to get the best possible results. Let's look at another one. The fourth objection is really interesting. In it, we see the claim that a person who allows others to do bad things is at least partially responsible for the bad deeds. So God, because he created the world and allows us to do bad things, is at least partially responsible for the bad things that we do. Leibniz's response has two parts. The first response is interesting in itself. Leibniz argues that God can allow mortals to sin if stopping them would lead to an even greater evil. It would be a good idea to ask yourself what sorts of problems would arise if God were to keep mortals from sinning. The second response is essentially a rehearsal of his response to objection 1. In brief, it's not wrong to allow some evil if doing so leads to an even greater good. Now let's look at the sixth objection. The sixth objection provides an argument to the effect that it is wrong to punish anyone who did the best that they could with the tools that you gave them. The idea here is that since God gave us all of our abilities and knowledge, if we sin because we are weak-willed or because we've never heard of the gospel, it's not really our fault. We were born this way, and so we shouldn't be punished for doing the best that we could. Leibniz again has an interesting response. First, he simply denies that God punishes people like infants that were never exposed to the Bible. Then he asserts that everyone is shown how to live by God, so everyone, even non-Christians, can get into heaven. Given that Leibniz was a devout Christian, this is an extraordinary response. Again, the central comeback here is that in reality, everyone, no matter when they were born or where they were born or what explicit beliefs they have, is given the chance to accept the light of God's teaching and earn their place in heaven. In general, when faced with the problem of evil, Leibniz's response is to argue that it's all part of God's plan, and that the proper reasoning can diffuse the concerns over God's nature and over his work in the world. In other words, Leibniz maintains that reason teaches us that we live in the best possible world. That's the end of our brief introduction to Leibniz's Theodicy. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.